Let me level with you. My stomach is turning. Sue Bird's actions are genuinely appalling. This is what we're stuck with. We're still chasing views instead of substance. Since I collect a paycheck from ESPN, I'm apparently expected to just ignore reality. Right. That is precisely where the crowd is gathered. Look, you're playing in a commercial arena. It isn't about ability. And for the record, people are allowed to be critical. Everyone is entitled to a viewpoint, but that is exactly where the logic fails me. Give her credit. She single-handedly leveled up the whole game. The gatekeepers wanted her silent, following the script and flashing a fake grin. Then, Caitlin Clark finally broke her silence. Her words completely shattered the power structures currently controlling the women's pro circuit. Far away from the stat sheets and viral clips, a massive conflict is brewing in the shadows. It isn't on the court. It's taking place in boardrooms and media hubs, carefully curated storylines that decide who gets a push and who gets buried long before their story even takes off. Caitlin Clark didn't just join the league. She blew the doors off the place. That is exactly why they see her as a threat. When a single athlete brings millions of fresh eyes to a league that once couldn't sell tickets, breaking every record for viewers, common sense dictates that she should be the golden child, protected at all costs. Even with Shannon, there is this weird vibe where they feel forced to justify their old takes on her. It's like they're shouting, "See, we were right about Caitlin," as if they need a shield. There's a dark undertone here because nobody ever doubted she was a goldmine for sponsors. That was never the debate. Instead, Clark was physically targeted every single night. Hard fouls and cheap shots, while the usual safety advocates stayed dead silent. That wasn't some fluke, it was calculated. Sue Bird knows exactly how the game is played off the court. She is a decorated icon and a powerful media presence. Her influence is massive, and she has made her stance crystal clear. Paige Bueckers is being groomed as the future, the clean-cut, predictable face for the next chapter of the sport. Just look at the evidence. Let's start with this specific headline right here. A forecast for 2028 national team. Paige Bueckers and the Rising Stars. So, it's the Paige Bueckers Variety Hour now? Remember when we analyzed that piece about them trying to build a national squad around her? Take a look at this. The national team outlook. It's all about Paige Bueckers and the upcoming talent. Meanwhile, Clark is framed as a problem. Too aggressive, too vocal, and way too independent for the brand they've spent years building. What the higher-ups missed is that Caitlin Clark doesn't need a green light from the establishment. She has a stronger foundation. Sold-out stadiums, endless viral clips, and kids worldwide hitting long shots because of number 22. You can't sanitize or rewrite that kind of impact. That isn't a PR stunt, it's a full-blown revolution. Revolutions don't ask for permission. Sue Bird has been dropping hints for months, subtly undermining her through podcasts and media panels. The highest compliments are always reserved for a specific category of athlete, the ones who follow instructions, play within the box, and represent the old-school style she's always defended. Caitlin, it's time to face the music. Sue Bird isn't in your corner the way you might imagine. Sue Bird is actively working against Caitlin Clark's narrative again, and it's a pattern that keeps repeating itself constantly. She's shifted the entire conversation about the national team to center on Paige Bueckers as the leader, with Caitlin just being another name. They won't even include Caitlin Clark in the promotional visuals for the program. They act like she hasn't earned her spot. It's the Paige show now. It's insanity. Caitlin, you need to open your eyes. Caitlin Clark's name is barely mentioned. When it is, there's always an awkward hesitation or a disclaimer. They claim statistics aren't everything, and that the sport is more complex than social media hype. That used to be a valid point. Not anymore. In this era, engagement is the lifeblood. Visibility is what keeps the lights on for these teams. Currently, Clark is the only one breaking through to people who never cared about the sport before. The corporate heads are fully aware. The data is impossible to ignore. Gate receipts, television ratings, and digital traction all explode the moment she steps onto the hardwood. But admitting that would mean confessing they totally misjudged the culture and the fans' true desires. So, rather than riding the wave, they chose a path of quiet opposition, not a loud protest, but a strategic cold shoulder. You see it in who gets the spotlight and who gets ignored, which stories are pushed and which ones are buried under talk of tradition. Clark caught every single slight. The snubs, the overlooked milestones, and the way her legendary performances were treated like background noise while secondary plots took the spotlight. She kept her head down, letting her dominance on the hardwood speak until the pressure finally hit a breaking point. Perhaps it was watching others get rewarded for the hype she generated, or realizing that her silence wasn't offering any real protection. It was simply making it easier for the powers that be to slowly airbrush her out of the picture. Whatever sparked the fire, Caitlin Clark reached a moment where playing by their outdated handbook stopped making any sense. The private thoughts she shared, now spilling out through whispers and loose lips, are exposing the harsh reality of the system. The league is currently standing at a massive fork in the road. One path leads toward explosive growth, global relevance, and a future that the fans are already demanding. The other retreats into comfort and control, favoring a version of the game that feels safe to the old guard but bores everyone else. Sue Bird is positioned at that exact same crossroads, and her true stance is finally coming into the light. The massive question now is what happens when the star they tried to diminish becomes too big to ignore. That pivotal moment occurred during a closed-door session 3 weeks ago. No cameras or PR teams, just a quiet, high-stakes discussion that determines careers, while the public remains completely oblivious. Clark walked in expecting a strategic talk about the national team and her role in the sport's global expansion. What she got instead felt like a masterclass in institutional rejection from the league's ultimate gatekeepers. A room full of former legends and media titans whose reach extends into every major front office decision. Sue Bird sat among them, her word carrying more weight than any championship ring. Clark didn't need to brag or explain. Her impact was undeniable, with arena attendance spiking by nearly 50% in every city she visited. Television viewership numbers shattered every previous record so violently that the entire history book had to be tossed out. Her merchandise sales surpassed the rest of the league combined, yet she didn't show up acting like a diva. She showed up with receipts, and that made the room turn cold. She brought cold, hard facts, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Because there is one specific truth the hierarchy refuses to say. Clark's rise isn't just a success story. It's a total condemnation, proving that the old way of doing business was fundamentally broken all along. Every viral highlight mocks the rigid, traditional media strategy the league spent years clinging to while ignoring millions of fans. There is a massive Caitlin Clark ripple effect across the entire basketball landscape, particularly in the television ratings. Give her credit, she has single-handedly forced the entire sport to a higher level. Her very existence threatens the legacy of the old guard, so when Bird spoke, it wasn't loud, it was chilling. It was a dismissal dressed up as mentorship, the kind of advice that sounds helpful but is designed to keep you small. The message was hidden behind corporate buzzwords and high-minded ideals, focusing on sustainability and league culture as a way to quietly put a leash on her meteoric rise. Clark listened as they lectured her on managing visibility and meeting the expectations that come with having such a massive platform. The underlying meaning was obvious. You're doing too much. Slow down. Stay in your lane. She remained calm, thanked them politely, and walked out fully aware that it wasn't a discussion at all. It was a face-to-face rejection. But that is exactly when her mindset flipped. Clark didn't back down. She didn't water down her personality or soften her competitive edge to make them feel better, she doubled her intensity. The following night, she went off for 38 points and 7 deep triples, barking at anyone who thought she'd shrink. The arena was absolutely buzzing. The energy was undeniable, and while the official media outlets were busy hyping someone else, Clark was busy dominating the conversation. That was the exact moment those closest to her started seeing a fundamental shift in her demeanor. It wasn't about her stats, which remained elite, but her perspective on a league that clearly resented the very impact she was having. She began questioning the point of giving her all to a system that refused to truly welcome her into the fold. "Why would I keep building a mansion for people who won't even let me inside?" she asked a close friend. Within 2 days, that comment was buzzing through the industry, shifting the focus from box scores to a cultural showdown. This had moved past statistics. It was a fight for standing. Sue Bird's reaction arrived quickly from the periphery. That is the standard rhythm. Veterans feel the heat and dismiss it as immaturity, as growing pains, or proof that youth ignores the big picture. Fans saw it differently. The digital world did not just offer shallow commentary, it brimmed with a reality that truly rattled the league. Pure collective strength. Individuals who ignored women's hoops until Clark arrived began airing their personal journeys. Experiences of being brushed aside, told they were out of place, or blocked from rooms they had rightfully earned. At that juncture, Clark was no longer a mere athlete. She became a cultural icon. And icons do not obey orders. That is when the front office grew anxious, not due to the friction. They can handle friction, but the analytics presented a narrative they could not manipulate. Ratings tanked without Clark on screen. Ticket sales froze in cities she missed. The supposed boom was not universal. It centered on her. She was not just helping everyone float, she was the entire ship. If she ever moved to a different league or platform that actually recognized her power, the fallout would be immense. The WNBA's touted era of growth was suddenly in danger of being revealed as a hollow facade. Brittle, dependent, and fueled by a single source, a fact the league insiders knew all too well. The same critics who once ignored Caitlin Clark started making calls. The tone turned desperate. Private sessions were demanded. Inquiries pivoted toward her future intent and how the league could better accommodate her journey. The timing revealed everything because Clark had already chosen her path, not regarding a departure yet, but something far more vital. She was finished pretending the constant slights did not occur. Done shielding people who never protected her. She was ready to speak out. A major sports network secured the exclusive sit-down. Prime time. No pre-screened inquiries allowed. No PR filters managing the talk, just Caitlin Clark, the lens, and 30 minutes of honesty. The elite grew restless. Birds Camp reacted. Media slots began piling up. The rhetoric started to soften. Talk of simple errors and shared visions for the sport emerged. It sounded scripted and failed to connect. The transition was blatant, and the audience was not convinced. Tension was building. Clark was about to cross their forbidden boundary. Once that line was crossed, there was no way to reclaim the story. The interview went live on a Tuesday evening during the peak of the sports week when attention was highest. From the opening seconds, it was obvious this was no standard PR stunt. This was something transformative. The kind of crossroad you cannot backtrack from. This is where the tension became an all-out war. Caitlin Clark began with composure. Her voice was calm yet sharp enough to command total focus. She discussed being told to feel lucky. Lucky for the chance, lucky for the stage, lucky just to be permitted to play her game. She let the quiet linger before pointing out the massive flaw in that perspective. Nobody ever mentioned what the organization itself owed her. She spelled it out plainly. The packed-out arenas, the fans who came only for her, and the girls who never cared for basketball until they saw her play with that fire. The host tried to diffuse the situation, moving towards safer topics like personal growth. Clark stayed her course. She met the reality with directness. There are giants in the league, legends with loud voices, who have made it plain she does not fit their image of stardom. She explained that her style and her movement do not follow the traditional path they find comfortable. Then she looked into the lens and noted that she is the one selling the tickets, suggesting the path itself needs fixing. The fallout was instantaneous. Snippets went viral in heartbeats. No one needed to guess the targets, even without names being spoken. Sue Bird was the silent target. Analysts scrambled for takes. The league's PR machine went into full damage control mode. Sue Bird stayed silent for 18 hours. Then she posted. The tone was clean on the surface but heavy with meaning. She claimed she had spent her life building something for those who follow. True progress comes from honoring the game and the grind, she wrote, adding that solo fame fails if the foundation breaks. A few understood instantly. Others clearly still missed the point. That parting shot stung, because patronizing language about needing growth is usually how people talk to kids or subordinates, rather than to their actual peers. It hinted that Clark hadn't earned a spot she'd already bought with ratings and impact. Clark saw it. The fans saw it too. Her retaliation was lightning fast. Within 2 hours, she fired back without cameras, without long statements, without softening the blow, just a sharp social media post that flipped the entire narrative on its head. Rather than attacking directly, she exposed the fundamental hypocrisy beneath it all. The message went viral immediately, shattering the facade. That golden era mentioned so often by the old guard hadn't actually been filling stadiums or owning the news. For decades, games played in half-empty buildings with almost zero coverage. Everything shifted when Clark arrived and forced the world to finally watch. Suddenly, the league couldn't hide behind tradition because the version of the game they claimed to protect was invisible to the sports world before one player made it essential. That is when the battle started. Not quietly, but clearly, future versus past, results versus custom, momentum versus comfort. The establishment felt the heat. This stopped being about individual players and turned into a desperate fight for control. Who dictates what the WNBA becomes? Will it evolve with the times or retreat into a space that feels safe but is actually irrelevant? Diana Taurasi stepped in then. A long post followed preaching the importance of paying dues and honoring predecessors, claiming the league existed long before any rookie and would outlast them all. The goal was obvious: reassert the hierarchy, put the newcomer back in line. It backfired. Fans started digging. Old footage of her own early career resurfaced. Early moments where Taurasi herself was called too cocky and too aggressive. The double standard was completely undeniable. What was framed as a lesson ended up proving Clark's point. She refused to follow the grateful rookie script, and that's what unmasked the hypocrisy. The same fire and defiance that helped turn Diana into a legend was suddenly being treated like a flaw when Caitlin Clark displayed it. Only the scale changed. Clark was operating with bigger ratings, larger crowds, and undeniable impact. That made the old guard very uncomfortable. That unease was the true culprit. This wasn't about respect. It wasn't about tradition or doing things the right way. It was terror. Fear that the stories they spent years building were finally losing power. Fear that their controlled images were being dismantled by a 23-year-old who didn't wait for permission before dominating. One player was rewriting the rules in real time, and the old system couldn't keep up. The media tried to slow it down. Analysts were called in. Panels were split. Debates were staged about etiquette and whether Clark was disrespectful or if the veterans were just guarding their territory. None of that really mattered. The audience had already reached a verdict, and the proof was in the hard numbers. Clark's jersey sales exploded following the interview. Her next game pulled the highest viewership the league had ever seen. Cities on her schedule started selling out arenas weeks in advance. The momentum was measurable. Meanwhile, the gatekeepers kept talking to an ever-shrinking circle of people who still cared. Tradition alone doesn't sustain leagues, relevance does, and only one player was delivering it. The tension broke when leaked audio surfaced from a private chat involving several veterans. This pushed the situation past speculation and into something far more volatile. The leak removed all doubt. Someone recorded a private conversation where veterans weren't talking about Caitlin Clark's skill, her stats, or her influence. They were obsessing over the Clark problem. Not her game, but the way her success made others look by comparison. The bitterness wasn't subtle. They were resentful of sold-out arenas, annoyed that years of work hadn't sparked the same massive attention. The recording made it clear. This was never just basketball. The audio barely lasted 40 seconds, but it hit hard, confirming everything Clark had hinted at without speaking. This was about control and status, about the fear of being eclipsed by someone who didn't rise through the same channels or follow the unwritten rules. The people who once held all the power were panicking as that influence slipped away. Clark chose a path that was both calculated and surprisingly gentle. No retaliatory remarks followed, nor did any formal statements emerge to escalate the friction. She simply posted a photo showing her signing autographs for an endless swarm of young supporters. That silent gesture spoke volumes, proving that the game eclipsed mere ego or political noise. This move completely dismantled the trap her detractors laid, hoping she'd finally lose her cool. They hungered for evidence that she lacked the emotional stability to lead the league's grandest stage. Yet she appeared entirely centered on the fans, while others looked defensive and increasingly vulnerable. She offered zero feedback regarding that leaked audio, refusing to distance herself or condemn the tone. That quiet resolve had its own gravity, and Clark finally acknowledged the reality of the situation. During her subsequent outing, Clark put on a masterclass that essentially rewrote the history books. 42 points and 9 long-range bombs later, she dominated every single second of the contest. Nobody could argue who owned the spotlight that night, even when the press prodded for drama. Clark flashed a genuine grin, one brimming with raw confidence rather than some polished PR mask. Her performance did all the talking, leaving the league's inner circle desperate to regain their footing. They realized this wasn't an athlete they could easily manipulate, prompting a swift, shadowy response. A secret assembly was quickly organized, bypassing any public notice in favor of closed-door sessions packed with lawyers and ironclad NDAs. Although she was the sole topic of conversation, Clark was barred from entering that room. Commissioner Kathy Engelberg led a group of executives obsessed with mending a brand that was visibly fracturing. Huge financial gains were balanced on one side, all tied directly to a single player's magnetism. The income forecasts reached levels that seemed like pure fantasy only 2 or 3 years ago. Massive brands were finally pouring serious capital into the women's game, viewing it as a blue-chip asset. Opposite the money stood the old guard, those legendary figures who still commanded immense public respect. Should those veterans feel ignored, their collective influence could ignite a massive internal revolt instantly. Even without her physical presence, Sue Bird's shadow loomed heavily over every single decision being weighed. Her philosophy on tradition and fan loyalty resonated through the room as one leader voiced the obvious. They couldn't afford to lose Clark, yet they couldn't survive a war with the icons, Silence followed. The trade-off was brutal: side with the past or the future, and risk losing the other forever. Their eventual fix was a weak, middle-ground strategy involving vague press releases to please everyone. They relied on empty corporate jargon to mask deep-seated issues without actually fixing a single thing. Such a tactic failed completely, as true peace cannot be manufactured through carefully worded media blasts. As the front office fumbled their mediation, the fires of conflict only burned hotter across the board. Online platforms morphed into a chaotic war zone where every syllable and clip was scrutinized for malice. The media frenzy was deafening when Paige Bueckers dropped 25 points in her highly anticipated return. A tidal wave of glowing profiles and analyst hype immediately flooded the airwaves, comparing her to legends. The entire rollout looked like a movie, featuring slick editing, slow-motion shots, and high-tension musical scores. It was a manufactured turning point that hit home for those already rooting for that specific plot. I am testing some strategies, looking for various personnel and different combinations on the floor. That is my current perspective. She is clearly centering Team USA's future around Paige Bueckers' talent. However, the average fan started noticing a much more forced undertone to the whole production. The desperation to manufacture hype for others to rival Clark's organic growth was becoming painfully obvious. Bueckers simply wanted to play her game and regain her rhythm after being away so long. Nevertheless, she was cast as the corporate-approved alternative, the safe bet that checked every traditional box. Consequently, her wins were weaponized as critiques against others, fueling old biases and endless debates. It was an unjust burden for Bueckers, but fairness vanished once the narrative shifted toward maintaining control. Clark faced a brutal physical gauntlet. When PR stunts fail, things get violent on the court. Play got ugly fast. Aggressive hits became the new norm. Referees ignored borderline dangerous collisions. They swallowed their whistles whenever Clark attacked the rim. Pundits mirrored the silence. Talking heads who previously preached about athlete welfare suddenly lost their voices. Everyone saw the double standard. Despite catching ribs from elbows and getting hammered mid-air, she never folded. Between stitching wounds and limping through pain that would break others, she still notched 30-plus points thrice straight. True icons thrive under fire like that. Heat doesn't melt gold, it refines it. Still, the league's most prominent voices remained suspiciously mute. No tweets from Sue Bird regarding safety, not a single word of concern. She withheld the advocacy she usually gave others. The message was loud. Clark stood solitary. Her squad saw it. Her teammates stepped up physically and vocally to shield her. Other superstars played it safe. One teammate noted in a presser that the atmosphere shifted during Clark's minutes. Officiating changed, and defenders got reckless, yet every broadcaster seemed terrified to call it out. That soundbite went viral instantly. It forced fence-sitters to finally pick a corner in this fight. Blatantly ignoring the pattern required a total suspension of reality. Aja Wilson eventually spoke up with characteristic poise, sharp, thoughtful, and perfectly timed. Addressing the media, she honored the past but noted that evolution demands room for those moving the needle. She insisted that moving forward doesn't mean deleting the foundations. It adds to the legacy. She walked the tightrope of respecting legends while refusing to let history stifle current momentum. The old guard felt the weight of those words immediately. Diana Taurasi threw shade with a cryptic post about talent versus hype. Bird engaged with the shade, liking and then reposting it. The digital trail was captured instantly. Online forums erupted, dissecting every notification and deleted interaction. That hesitant dance proved the Cold War was now a public spectacle for everyone to see. It was a chaotic PR nightmare, but it was inevitable. Friction this intense always explodes eventually. The floodgates opened. And this was merely the opening act. High-level sponsors started hovering, holding hushed, high-stakes meetings with league executives behind the scenes. Their stance was clear. They bought into a growth story, not a civil war among its stars. The ultimatum was simple: fix the culture or watch the checks disappear. Suddenly, the battle wasn't about egos, it was about the survival of the business itself. The league had spent 30 years begging for this level of relevance and cash. Now that they had it, the architects were sabotaging the very person fueling the fire. Purely from a corporate view, this was an act of total self-sabotage. Commissioner Engelbert tried a final peace summit via a private conference call with the major players. They pitched it as a strategic vision meeting for the game's global future. Clark showed up early, offering polished strategies that respected tradition while chasing new frontiers. Bird arrived late and constantly talked over her younger peer. She dismissed Clark's ideas as naive, The vibe turned hostile in record time. 15 minutes in, Clark simply hung up. No drama, no goodbye, just a deadline. A deafening, awkward silence gripped the remaining callers for what felt like forever. When someone suggested calling her back, Bird shut the idea down immediately. She suggested that walking out proved Clark wasn't professional enough for the big leagues. That interaction stuck because it exposed a much deeper, more troubling reality. It wasn't about Clark's readiness for the league, but the league's fear of what she brought. The leak went viral in hours, and Clark's quiet reaction told the whole story without a word. A clip of her solo practice hit the feed. No beats, no words, no fluff, just a girl and a ball grinding. The underlying subtext screamed loud and clear. While the world barked, she kept shooting. Her followers didn't need a map. It went viral in seconds. 7-figure view counts within the hour. A tidal wave of replies flooded in from those who saw their own struggles in her. Folks who have been silenced during board meetings, cast aside in spaces they fought to enter, or told their wins were purely accidental rather than paid for in blood. At that point, Clark morphed into an icon. She stood for every soul ordered to shut up, play nice, and settle for crumbs. Then, the tide turned from a blind spot. It didn't start with the old guard or icons protecting their turf. Support erupted from the trenches. The very athletes sweating alongside Clark on the hardwood every single evening. Those witnessing the reality from 3 feet away realized they couldn't stay silent for another minute. Sabrina Ionescu was the first to break the seal. Following a brutal match where Clark was battered without a single foul called, Ionescu demanded universal protection for elite talent. Zero fine print. Brianna Stewart echoed the sentiment instantly. Soon, Kelsey Plum, Jewel Lloyd, and Arik Ogunbowale joined the chorus. Leading stars drew their lines in the sand. No monologues or flowery prose, just a unified front that spoke volumes. They recognized the scheme and rejected it. Refusing to normalize the mistreatment, they flipped the script for good. We weren't dealing with greenhorns or fringe players who could be dismissed as naive. These were heavy hitters, champions, and gold medalists with massive clout all staring at the same ugly truth. The heat on Caitlin Clark wasn't about the game's integrity or honoring legacy. It was a different beast altogether, and the front office couldn't hide from the public's glaring gaze. Deep down, terror took hold. Sue Bird couldn't just swat this away like she did with Clark, nor label it as youth or recklessness. The voices rising up weren't just new kids on the block. Her own equals players with just as many trophies flatly refused to back the story she had been trying to sell. For once, Bird was stranded on an island. She attempted to spin the story one more time. She shared a note on the beauty of discourse and diverse views. It flopped. The energy had already shifted elsewhere. The youth movement picked its side, gazing into the future. Newsrooms couldn't pigeonhole this as a one-person drama anymore. The Clark spark ignited a massive firestorm regarding the league's fundamental guidance, growth, and whether the sport would seize its golden moment or sabotage it through petty jealousy. ESPN dropped a hardcore investigation without the usual sugarcoating. No fluff, no forced neutrality. They dissected the cold, hard data. Ratings, ticket sales, online hype, and jersey revenue were all peeled back. The findings decimated the claim that everyone was rising together. The gravity was lopsided. Matches starring Caitlin Clark pulled in over 1 million sets of eyes on average. Other games barely saw a sliver of those figures. When she came to town, stadium seats vanished in 60 minutes. Those same venues sat mostly empty for anyone else. This wasn't a universal boom for the sport. It was a planetary pull. Clark wasn't a mere cog. She was the entire engine driving the machine. The data featured quotes from newcomers, folks who had never given the sport a glance before her debut. A clear trend emerged. They were watching for one reason, and one reason only. No Clark, no interest. They were hooked on her swagger, her fire, and her undeniable vision. Plenty of them couldn't identify another face on the court. That brutal truth caught fire because it was impossible to sugarcoat. The association had toiled for 20-plus years to create household names. A single athlete pulled it off in 2 seasons just by being bold and dominant. Her ascent wasn't what hurt. It was the bitter refusal of others to cheer for it. The spite finally boiled over during Sue Bird's extended sit-down. She attempted to walk back her words and claim she never meant to belittle the achievements of others. She rambled about the greater good, but her mask slipped halfway through the conversation. She insisted that lasting progress requires deep roots, rather than some passing fad. Another low blow. She was hinting that Caitlin Clark's fame was just a hollow, temporary bubble. Bird was hell-bent on drawing a line between her definition of power and whatever this was. Kudos to the reporter. They didn't miss a beat with that follow-up. Was Clark a fluke? Bird fumbled through damage control, but that ship had already sailed. While trying to stay cool, she let her real feelings slip, confirming everyone's suspicions. To her, Clark lacked street cred. Meanwhile, Clark stayed silent, letting the noise fade. Silence was her weapon. Her inner circle spoke out with cold facts about her character, not shady rumors. A coach recalled Clark leaving with a bloody eye, yet she never uttered a moan. No blame. She got patched up and signed autographs for hours because kids come first. Grit first, crowd second. Soon, these anecdotes became the talk of the town. It wasn't about stats anymore. It was soul. This wasn't just a talented rookie, a visionary hell-bent on elevating the sport, even as the old guard resisted her. As pundits argued, big money moved. Nike didn't bother with a boring official statement. Their entire league marketing playbook underwent a massive, sudden overhaul. Every ad featured Clark front and center, a power move that scrapped previous plans. Blitzes were rebuilt on the fly for her, sparking a chain reaction industry-wide. Gatorade and State Farm pivoted. Brands with skin in the game dumped budgets into the one person moving the needle. The office was powerless. Corporations weren't playing favorites. They were strictly following data. The stats ignored seniority, caring nothing for who earned their turn in the spotlight. Eyeballs equal cash, cash flows to relevance, and right now, Caitlyn is it. This left traditional gatekeepers facing their ultimate nightmare, becoming totally obsolete. Once the spotlight and sales align with her, who cares what legends think? Social standing is worthless once fans choose their queen. The hierarchy was collapsing. Architects of the sport watched their power evaporate as the fans simply walked away. Sucked into drama, Paige Buchers eventually stepped up to clear the air. She was raw. Her goal was hoops, not being a weapon against others. She praised Clark for boosting the league while staying focused on her own journey. Her point: there's space for everyone if media would stop manufacturing fake wars. It was a surgical strike against pundits, using her as a pawn to tear Clark down. Bird tried to spin things, acting like Paige's comments backed her own shaky arguments. That lie failed. Paige doubled down, insisting Clark's impact mattered most, effectively stripping away Bird's defense. The sisterhood excuse died when athletes begged her to stop using them as props. Executives lost their minds as their curated image crumbled under the weight of controversy. Icons looked bitter while the active roster was split right down the middle. Crowds picked hills to die on, but the analytics kept screaming the same truth. She was the golden goose, yet bickering threatened the biggest boom in history. Commissioner Kathy Angelbert tried one final desperate play for order. They called a summit, a kumbaya meeting for elites to discuss the future. On paper, it looked like teamwork. Really, it was an ambush for obedience. Her team played it smart, giving a non-committal maybe due to scheduling. She wasn't walking into a trap to be scolded by people who doubted her. The date was set, invites mailed. The press wondered if she'd show, but 48 hours prior, the landscape exploded. A bombshell report from The Athletic dropped, shifting focus away from petty locker drama. It all involved money, specifically the way new wealth from the league's boom was being carved up and who was truly reaping the rewards from it. The expose hit at dawn and spread instantly. Its blunt headline focused on the massive disconnect between league growth and actual player pay. Within the opening pages, the investigation exposed a brutal financial imbalance. Caitlyn Clark, the phenom driving the surge in ratings, was still stuck on a basic entry-level rookie salary despite her massive impact. Simultaneously, various legends with minor roles raked in consulting checks and brand deals tied to the league's success and growth initiatives. The league featured secret files and contracts, sponsorship deals, and marketing budgets that funneled massive funds toward legacy ambassadors instead of the stars fans actually wanted to see, while Clark carried the league's relevance through her skill and fame alone. One chapter was startling. It detailed how Sue Bird's media firm had secured a multi-million-dollar league contract to advise on strategy and development. The implication was absolutely impossible to avoid. The athlete fueling the fire wasn't getting her share, while the ones controlling the narrative sat in total financial comfort. By the final paragraph, the entire national conversation had shifted gears completely. This wasn't just about respect or basic recognition. It was a fight for power and who profited from the league's so-called progress. Months after Caitlyn Clark's debut season shattered every single commercial record, it became obvious just how deep this systemic contradiction truly ran. Bird was being paid to guide the league's expansion. Simultaneously, she was publicly casting doubt on the very player driving that expansion. This blatant conflict of interest was impossible to overlook, and the report didn't end there. The deep dive traced every cent through secret foundations, corporate partnerships, media deals, and various internal development programs. A trend surfaced. Wealth was being shoveled toward a tiny clique of former players who shared one common goal. They were the old guard, united in their mission to stifle Clark's rise. This was no longer just about personal grudges or wounded pride anymore. It was transactional. Their influence translated directly into their income. Their advisory roles and brand deals relied on a hierarchy where status mattered more than actual, measurable results on the court. Clark threatened that world by proving how obsolete it was. If brands began paying for results instead of names, if cash started flowing toward whoever actually moved the needle, those lucrative post-career revenue streams would evaporate overnight. That made things truly volatile. All talk of protecting the game vanished under the weight of evidence. This was about guarding salaries, not basketball, and the internet reacted instantly. Traffic surged so fast that platforms crashed. Screenshots went viral. Users frantically pulled up additional public records. New links surfaced. What seemed like random choices began to look like an entire ecosystem of quiet self-enrichment that had operated unnoticed for many years. Bird vanished. Her upcoming podcast episodes disappeared. Public appearances were axed, and her feeds froze. For the first time in an age, there was no PR statement to soften the blow. No narrative could make this look like anything other than raw greed. The organization issued a generic response about transparency and internal reviews within just a few short hours. It failed. Fans knew Clark hadn't lied, as she had been the only consistent element from the start. Instead, the public felt stabbed in the back by the icons they admired. These were the people preaching for the good of the sport while getting rich by trying to keep its brightest star in a cage. After 3 days of silence, Clark finally posted, but not about the scandal. No mention of the cash, no mention of the league, just a single image of her alone in a dark gym taking shots. No explanation was required. The message was understood without words. While the insiders were busy maneuvering behind closed doors, she was doing exactly what she always does, perfecting her craft. While others were obsessed with holding her back, Caitlin Clark just kept moving forward. Her upload exploded across every digital platform, pulling in roughly 20 million impressions in only 6 hours. That interaction alone dwarfed the ratings for most championship games. The massive disparity was undeniable, shifting the entire atmosphere of the upcoming Unity Summit scheduled in just 2 days. The event, once marketed as a path toward harmony and restoration, had lost every ounce of its warmth. A heavy sense of responsibility hung over the gathering. Athletes started slipping away without making a sound. It wasn't the rookies they were fully committed, but rather the seasoned pros who were jumping ship. Identical icons tied to the audits. Legends now following legal advice to keep quiet while their contracts underwent intense scrutiny. Just 24 hours before the grand opening, Diana Taurasi dropped a bombshell by quitting the sport right then and there. People grew suspicious of the schedule. Her brief, pensive message spoke of ending her era to let fresh talent take the stage. Forget the goodbye laps or one last year. She simply vanished the second the heat became too much to handle. Sticking around would have forced her to face the music, interrogations regarding cash flow, power plays, and why she attacked Clark while cashing checks fueled by the very star she criticized. These weren't the kind of inquiries that had simple or pretty solutions. News outlets attempted their standard playbook, airing old reels and praising her athletic dominance as they do for every retiring icon. However, the digital landscape didn't bite. Supporters saw through the noise, armed with facts they had no intention of ignoring. A single theme echoed through every social app. Everyone honored her skill on the hardwood. Yet, there was deep bitterness regarding her behavior once she stepped away from the game. Critics highlighted the massive gap between her historic fame and her efforts to sabotage the league's biggest rising phenom. Sue Bird was stuck in an even worse corner. Walking away wasn't a choice, as her jersey had been retired ages ago. Her current power rested on her analyst chair and her reputation as a mentor, a role that required total honesty to survive. By the time the conference neared, the entire landscape had undergone a seismic transformation. Forget damage control. This was a battle for survival for leaders who realized they no longer held the steering wheel. The path back was being incinerated in real time. Major brands started backing away without a peep. Contractual ties were put on hold behind closed doors. Networks shelved her show for the foreseeable future, citing conflicts, while her public appearances vanished from the books. Having spent months attempting to dim Caitlin Clark's light, Sue Bird witnessed her own relevance crumble before her eyes. On the eve of the big meetup, Clark avoided the big-name broadcasters and the flashy television studios. She opted for a grassroots show run by an ex-pro who had fought for the sport long before the big money arrived. The vibe was raw. The dialogue was unapologetically blunt. Clark emphasized that she never campaigned to be the face of a corporate civil war. Her dream was simple: hoop, engage with the crowd, and let the sport flourish. Then she detailed the moment things soured. Witnessing the inner gears of the machine, she realized those demanding her modesty were getting rich by keeping her quiet. That epiphany changed the entire game for her. She vowed not to diminish her worth for the sake of heritage or profit, since genuine appreciation was always withheld anyway. She argued that staying true to herself beat being comfortable, noting that friction is usually a sign of forward motion. Asked about the upcoming meeting, Clark refused to give a rehearsed or evasive answer. She promised to be there, not to play nice but to stare down officials while they justified their shady maneuvers as league progress. Even as balance sheets contradicted their claims, snippets of her talk went viral across the globe. Hits reached 7 figures within hours. The message was loud and clear. Clark didn't fear a soul. She wasn't backing down, nor would she cooperate with an organization that had been sabotaging her from the start. Come dawn, the tension at the main offices was palpable. Guards were stationed at every corner. Legal gags were handed out. Every cell phone was confiscated upon entry to ensure total secrecy. The much-hyped unity talk had morphed into an unavoidable day of judgment that finally came due. It felt like a court hearing rather than a chat. The opening block was supposed to be about a collective dream for tomorrow. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert started with scripted notes regarding solidarity, expansion, and honoring everyone's input to the game. She hadn't even spoken for 10 minutes when Caitlin Clark's hand shot into the air. She demanded they discuss the finances. A deafening silence instantly swallowed the entire hall. Engelbert attempted a pivot, claiming bank statements could wait while they focused on emotional repair and advancement. Clark wouldn't budge. She insisted that moving ahead while ignoring the reason for the gathering was a total waste of time. The preliminary digging had already set the stage for what came next. She called out the room for getting rich off the sport's growth while secretly sabotaging the player making it happen. Those high-priced consulting fees were a front for a scheme to keep her quiet. True unity required gut-wrenching honesty first. Bird shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes glued to the floor to avoid any direct eye contact. A veteran tried to deflect by talking down about youth and business, but Aja Wilson shut that noise down instantly. She claimed Clark saw through the charade completely, and that was the problem. The secret was out for everyone now. In that split second, the mask slipped. This was no longer just Clark taking on the entire league. It became a showdown between the truth and the false reality everyone had been protecting. The summit disintegrated into finger-pointing. Defenses went up. Some bolted for the exit. Others finally leaked details of the corruption they had been forced to bury. Arguments collided in a chaotic blur. By lunchtime, any shred of professional order had completely evaporated. By dusk, the entire summit had collapsed. It wasn't just the end of an event, though. The old power structure that ruled without consequence was finished. Exposed to the light, it withered and died. Caitlin Clark walked out past the flashing cameras without saying a word. She didn't need a press release to speak. The heavy lifting had been done in the room. The fallout hit the organization like a ton of bricks. By morning, 3 top-tier board members had quit. There were no polished excuses about moving on to better things. The exits were sudden and messy, confirming the grim reality that everyone in the room already felt. The league had burned its bridges. Whatever replaced it would be built on new ground. Their resignations weren't voluntary. It was clear to everyone that once the financial double-dealing was part of the public record in real time, the path back was blocked, especially after audio from that private closed-door session leaked to the public within 12 hours. It wasn't supposed to happen, but the leaked recording was authentic and absolutely soul-crushing for the establishment. Those tapes captured raw conversations that shattered any remaining belief in the league's integrity. Sue Bird's voice was captured mid-argument, loudly insisting that she and her peers had carried the league when nobody was watching, so they deserved to reap the rewards, regardless of who was responsible for the massive new growth. Another recording caught a high-ranking official, admitting something they never wanted the public to hear. They acknowledged Clark's drawing power was massive, but argued that giving one player that much influence would ruin future deals. The most toxic clip came from a private chat between 2 veterans during a short recess. They talked shop about letting Clark pack the houses while they cashed in on growth bonuses tied to her. The plan was to rig the system before Clark could ever sign a deal that reflected her true value. It was calculated, ruthless, and there was absolutely no way for them to spin it. The audio went viral in seconds. Social media caught fire. Every major sports network put the clips on loop. Analysts who preached about paying dues flipped the script instantly, acting like they were always on the right side. The sudden change in heart was as shameful as it was predictable. When the truth is this undeniable, people start rewriting history. Caitlin Clark stayed silent for a day and a half. No clapbacks, no statements. She just let the leaked tapes burn the whole house down for her. When she finally broke her silence, it wasn't about the drama, it was a massive career move. She revealed the launch of the Clark Foundation, providing elite resources for young athletes who don't fit the typical mold. Zero mention of the leaks or the backstabbers. Just a forward-thinking move that made her enemies look small. While others were recorded plotting to protect their turf, Clark was busy building an entirely new playground. That contrast spoke louder than any angry response ever could have. Sometimes you don't ask for a seat, you just go build your own table. The message behind Clark's play was unmistakable. If the gatekeepers won't let you in, you go around them. You start a new game entirely. And Caitlin Clark had the weight to make it stick. The massive endorsement deals the old guard laughed at gave her the power to walk away. It wasn't just influence, it was true independence from the hierarchy. The reaction from the locker room was fast. Within hours, a wave of players stepped out. Not the tired veterans, but the young stars who had been taking notes. Sabrina Ionescu officially pledged her name as an ambassador, while Paige Buchers rattled the establishment by stepping into an advisory role. Even Aja Wilson, usually the master of diplomacy, broke her neutral streak with a high-profile gift and a public show of force. This synergy carried weight. Far from mere optics, it was a live-action rebellion of players who truly grasped the changing tides. The old guard's crumbling walls couldn't stop the players from building a brand new house on their own terms. The league's front office scrambled to find some solid ground in the shifting landscape. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert hit the airwaves, pitching a fresh vision of player-first policies and modern upgrades. They called for a third-party audit of their dealings, but the timing felt hollow. Offering a cure after the diagnosis went public is just managing a crisis. Brand partners moved faster than the league. Nike didn't just tweak their ads, they tore the script apart. They birthed a specialized internal branch dedicated exclusively to the rule breakers who challenged the status quo rather than protecting it. While Clark stood at the epicenter, the ripple was clear. Capital flows toward cultural impact, not through traditional gatekeepers. Other giants adopted the same blueprint. Within a few weeks, a shadow economy had fundamentally altered the sports landscape. One path moved with Clark and the visionaries. The other drifted toward the past, gasping for air as the spotlight vanished. The marketplace didn't blink. The winner was set. 3 weeks post-summit, Sue Bird finally broke her long-standing silence. It wasn't a flashy TV spot, but a raw, meticulously composed piece on the Players' Tribune platform. The sheer timing of her statement was enough to send shockwaves through the community. Her words danced between reflection and defense, offering a messy cocktail of apologies and justifications. Bird portrayed her decades of service as a constant battle for the game, spinning her choices as a shield for what she loved. She conceded in a very curated way that protecting a legacy can sometimes unintentionally stifle the very growth it seeks to foster. It was a rare, fleeting glimpse of her almost taking ownership of the friction. Yet, she clung to the belief that her good intentions outshone her errors. The public's reaction was instantly and predictably polarized. One side of the aisle praised her vulnerability as a genuine move toward reconciling with the new era. The other camp dismissed it as a desperate save for her reputation after the bridge had already burned. Caitlin Clark stayed silent. Word from her inner circle was that she digested the letter, gave a nod of acknowledgement, and kept walking forward. To Clark, this wasn't a personal takedown of a legend. It was about refusing to let her own light be dimmed by someone else's shadow. By the time the 2025 season launched, the league's very oxygen felt charged with a different electricity. Every stadium was a sellout. While Clark remained the golden ticket, the entire league was now basking in that same blinding heat. The drama had snagged the world's gaze, and once people look, they stay. That cultural boom translated to profit instantly. The WNBA's broadcast rights were torn up and rewritten long before the ink on the old deal could even dry. Networks that once ignored the calls were now throwing everything they had into a bidding war for the airwaves. The final payout was nearly 4 times the old mark. Tucked into the fine print was a revolutionary shift in power. Paychecks were now directly tethered to a player's concrete influence on ticket sales and viewer metrics. Not tenure, not gold medals, cold, hard data. Caitlin Clark finally saw her pay match her massive economic footprint. Beyond the money, the infrastructure was rebuilt. The next wave of phenoms won't have to bleed for the same respect. Evolution was no longer a choice. It was forced by one athlete who simply refused to play small for the sake of comfort. That is the true definition of a lasting legacy. Not hoarding the keys to the castle, but smashing the doors down so those following don't have to fight to get inside. The irony was thick when Clark's opening night pitted her against the very team Bird helped own, a detail no fan missed. Reporters tried to frame it as a grudge match, but Clark killed that narrative with a single, sharp sentence. "I'm just playing ball," she said, though the scoreboard suggested she was doing something much more profound. She brushed off the noise, noting how outsiders often hallucinate a reality that doesn't exist behind closed doors. In the end, she insisted that only her teammates and the coaching staff mattered in her pursuit of excellence. That had always been her singular focus: sharp, precise, impossible to ignore. Her performance on the hardwood verified her words. Clark operated with a terrifying blend of raw power and effortless grace. 41 points and 9 buckets from deep. She dictated the rhythm, shredded the defense, and navigated the floor like a grandmaster. The roar of the crowd wasn't just for one player anymore. It was the sound of a game that had finally arrived. A collective realization took hold. This was no longer just an ordinary night on the court. It marked the definitive moment the landscape shifted, right as Clark exited toward the locker room. Passing by the executive level, she caught a fleeting glance from Subert in the stands. No drama followed, only a silent, heavy recognition before she continued her walk. With fans waiting and a legacy to build, she stopped letting yesterday dictate her tomorrow. The public narrative simply reinvented itself. Media focus drifted from petty friction to the thousands of girls inspired by her play. Communities flourished through her initiatives, turning abstract goals into concrete, visible progress. These accounts didn't need manufactured hype. The simple truth eventually commanded the room. Subert offered one final public reflection before fading away from the cameras for good. The message was short, posted quietly without any unnecessary theatrics or noise. "I was mistaken about many things, yet certain that the sport is larger than any individual. Caitlin Clark is unveiling the future, and it burns far brighter than I ever expected." By then, rhetoric mattered little. Her undeniable impact had already forged a lasting heritage. Some critics remained anchored to the past, endlessly litigating old disputes and credits. Clark never acknowledged them, finding that her silence served as the perfect rebuttal. While others dissected history, she spent 6 months completely reinventing the league's identity. Fresh leadership and vibrant energy took over as the old establishment slowly dissolved. Roles were reduced and paths diverged, but the real change was the loss of control. The athletes finally held the steering wheel, trading symbolic influence for absolute power. This was genuine leverage, born from a refusal to settle for less than their worth. That revolution started with one player who saw a restrictive system and simply walked past it. Such confidence comes from knowing your value and refusing to shrink for someone else's comfort. That is the authentic history, not the bickering, but the profound shift in the status quo. This is what happens when elite skill meets the perfect moment and raw bravery. She didn't just play the game, she shattered the ceiling and invited everyone else through. She transformed the realm of the possible for every young athlete watching her rise. Every person told to stay small saw an alternative, a way to burn bright regardless. It wasn't a path without obstacles, but one walked with fierce and deliberate intention. 1 year later, the metamorphosis of the sports culture was absolute and undeniable. The league had reached a peak where it was finally impossible for the world to ignore. 3.2 million viewers watched her opener, crushing professional men's basketball ratings. Major broadcasters scrambled to expand their coverage to meet the surging demand. Pundits who ignored women's sports were suddenly analyzing her deep range and tactical IQ. The summit was reached, yet the most vital shift happened quietly within the team locker rooms. The next generation of rookies stopped asking for a seat at the established table. They began designing their own rooms from the ground up. She provided a masterclass. You don't need a hall pass to be an icon. When you become undeniable, the world has no choice but to follow your lead. The Clark Foundation surged, opening 15 specialized facilities across the entire country. Thousands of athletes gained resources in neighborhoods that the system had previously abandoned. But her most significant contribution wasn't made of hardwood or steel. It was a lesson in narrative ownership, teaching young players to control their own destiny. She grasped a fundamental truth that the former power players never quite understood. On-court performance is merely the spark for a much larger, enduring fire. Career trajectories are forged by narrative and timing just as much as on-court statistics. Clark recognized this vulnerability and funneled her focus into reclaiming that power. Her mission wasn't merely instructing the youth on basketball techniques. She provided the tools to resist the very institutions that once sought to diminish her influence. It was a calculated move. This shift deeply unsettled those who had spent years profiting from controlling the narratives of young athletes. The connection between Paige Bueckers and Clark evolved significantly. While reporters hungered for a feud, the underlying truth was far more compelling. It became a masterclass in survival. Bueckers studied every move Clark made to traverse the industry's obstacles, mastering the art of the refusal, securing leverage early, and identifying gatekeepers who mask self-preservation as tradition. During a media session, Bueckers faced questions regarding the heavy burden of being constantly measured against Clark. Her answer dismantled the entire premise. She made it clear they were never fighting for the same piece of territory. Their combined impact was actually making the entire landscape much larger for everyone. The rivalry trope served as easy clickbait, but it ignored the reality that multiple icons can flourish simultaneously. That realization rendered old media tropes useless. Simultaneously, Sue Bird's dominance in the sports media world began to wane. She hadn't disappeared, but her footprint had shrunk. The massive platform she once commanded was slipping away into the background. This transition happened quietly, without a formal declaration. It was the natural erosion that accompanies true systemic change. Some of this retreat was by design after the public fallout, yet much of it was simply the cold reality of the market. Television executives were losing interest in voices that prioritized the past over the current revolution. The industry demanded perspectives that looked toward the future of the sport rather than its history. Rumors swirled that Bird attempted to secure funding for her own sports media enterprise. She pitched potential backers on a vision built around old-school fundamentals and conservative basketball philosophies. The capital never arrived. Investors were hunting for scale and modern relevance, not a return to the status quo. Ultimately, Bird found herself no longer at the center of the industry's most vital conversations. There was a certain melancholy in seeing a genuine icon sidelined, not for her athletic decline, but for her post-career choices. Her accomplishments on the hardwood should have made her position ironclad. Instead, her legacy became muddled by her attempts to gatekeep those who came after her. The lesson was impossible to ignore. True greatness is defined by the doors you open for others. Diana Taurasi's exit was messy, yet it was definitive. She chose to step into the shadows and build a life entirely separate from the professional game. She found a sense of calm in that distance, though confidants suggest she regretted the rigid stance she took in her final years. That resistance, which once felt like protection, appeared increasingly small in the rearview mirror. A former teammate noted that she mistook defending her own throne for defending the sport itself. Those two motivations are worlds apart. By the time the truth hit home, the entire industry had already transformed. The waves of transformation eventually crashed against the very top of the organization. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert moved on to pursue different professional paths. 6 months following the summit, the league hired a tech visionary from outside the sports world to lead the way. It was a bold declaration of where the league's priorities now lay. Her initial major policy change triggered immediate resistance. A new pay structure was launched, linking player earnings directly to their individual impact on the league's growth. The traditionalists fought the move with everything they had. They claimed it would ruin team chemistry and breed greed, yet the financial data proved them entirely wrong. Corporate sponsorships surged over 300% within 3 years, and attendance shattered every previous record. The league went from begging for scraps of coverage to turning away media outlets because the demand was overwhelming. This explosion was fueled by athletes who prioritized their personal brands while still lifting their teams to new heights. Caitlin Clark served as the primary blueprint, but she was no longer the only one in the spotlight. She shattered the glass ceiling, and an entire generation surged through. Even locker room dynamics shifted unexpectedly. The toxic culture of hazing and forcing rookies to remain silent faded into obsolescence almost overnight. Organizations finally understood a basic truth once they removed personal pride from the business side of things. Crushing a young star's potential doesn't protect the team. It just gifts a superstar to a different franchise. Seasoned pros traded jealousy for guidance, realizing that helping others didn't shrink their own spotlight. Success wasn't a pie they had to fight over anymore. A surging current elevates every vessel, provided nobody is busy sabotaging the hull from within. Clark became the living blueprint. Her triumphs didn't steal the stage. They built a bigger theater where every performer got a turn in the limelight. Heavy investment triggered massive pay raises across the board. Packed stadiums birthed professional-grade travel and elite training grounds for everyone. Suppressing her brilliance would have essentially strangled the league's entire evolution in its crib. For ages, the legends clung to their tiny hills, oblivious to the fact they could have been sculpting a mountain range together. 3 seasons past her debut, Caitlin Clark inked a deal that shattered every financial ceiling in league history. Word got out early: $28 million over 4 years, potentially climbing past $35 million with bonuses. The old benchmark was barely $11 million. Public opinion fractured instantly. Half the world shouted finally, while skeptics wondered if any soul deserved such riches in a fragile industry. Yet, most simply nodded in agreement. By that point, Clark's worth wasn't just some abstract idea or marketing hype. The data was undeniable. When the ink dried, she didn't flaunt her wealth or snap a selfie with the paperwork. Instead, she posted a shot of youngsters at her facility, each sporting a jersey featuring their own proud surnames on the back. The true purpose, she signaled. There was zero gloating or grandstanding, just pure, unadulterated perspective on why the money mattered. It served as a silent testament to her struggle against being minimized. The battle was always bigger than just one girl's name. This was about opening doors for the next generation. Interestingly, Sue Bird hit the heart icon, though she kept her thoughts private. No words, no explanations, just a solitary like. It marked the first public peace offering between them in over 2 years. Observers dissected the gesture endlessly. To some, it was a truce. To others, a white flag or even a tinge of remorse. Perhaps it was all those things at once, a simple nod that the war was over and the victor was set in stone. Not because she tore anyone down, but because her impact was so massive, the old machinery simply had to upgrade or break. That is the enduring monument Caitlin Clark constructed with her own 2 hands. She didn't thrive despite the friction, she thrived because of it. The crushing weight failed to shatter her spirit. It acted as a forge, tempering her into a revolutionary force the hardwood had never witnessed and would never dare forget. More than a superstar, she was a pioneer who refused to shrink herself just to make the insecure feel comfortable. Honestly, looking back at last season, the highlight was just how much we actually enjoyed being around each other. Sure, we dropped those first 8 matchups, but winning would have been impossible without such a rock-solid bond and a healthy locker room atmosphere. That connection is exactly how we flipped the script. We just needed a minute as a fresh squad to finally find our rhythm. I mean, truly, the whole ride was a blast. Her journey hit home for anyone ever ordered to wait their turn or stay within boundaries designed to keep them restrained. Clark didn't just rattle the cage, she walked right through the bars and never looked back at the wreckage. 5 years in, she had transcended sports to become a corporate enigma. Top MBA programs began dissecting her meteoric brand expansion. Marketing experts obsessed over how she cultivated a fan base that reached far beyond the typical basketball demographics. Seminars on player power cited her as the ultimate proof of what happens when raw skill meets unyielding leverage and truth. The most profound breakdown, however, surfaced from a totally unanticipated corner of the academic world. A deep-dive doctoral paper emerged, written by a sociology scholar who had spent 3 years tracking the Clark effect in real time. This study didn't care about her jump shot or her points per game. It dissected how crumbling institutions panic when faced with disruption, and the predictable bitterness of gatekeepers watching an outsider win on their own terms. The researcher grilled everyone from league suits to the diehards in the nosebleeds to get the full story. The findings were identical. Every entity that tried to cage Clark's momentum ended up losing its own seat at the table. Every tongue that tried to spit on her legacy went silent, and every trap set to box her in only caught the hunters. Meanwhile, those smart enough to surf her wave instead of fighting the tide became more powerful than they ever imagined. The establishment didn't undergo a change of heart out of the goodness of its soul. It evolved because reality gave it no other choice. That transformation remains the crown jewel of her professional legacy. The paper's final word was simple, yet in today's noisy media world, it hit like a ton of bricks. Being real pays dividends. Systems that fight genuine greatness don't just miss the boat, they sink themselves in the process. That academic bombshell tore through the offices of sports agents and media moguls faster than a championship parade. It wasn't about the shock of a secret, but the weight of cold evidence validating what fans had witnessed for years. Sue Bird's name surfaced constantly in the data. portrayed not as a typical antagonist, but as a cautionary icon who let the drive to protect her kingdom hinder the next generation from building theirs. A legend with every chance to bridge the gap between eras, who chose instead to stand as a roadblock. When asked for a quote, Bird went silent. Her publicist issued a brief note saying she'd moved on and preferred her legacy did the talking. The PR spin was polished, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. She hadn't actually walked away. She'd been eclipsed by a force she could no longer contain. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark was conquering territory once thought unreachable, launching a shoe line that crushed the sales of the entire league combined. She founded a media house to tell raw stories of athletes who refused to play by the established rules. A massive streaming deal followed, aimed squarely at shining a light on the next crop of basketball phenoms. This wasn't some calculated boardroom play. People flocked to her because she remained the same unapologetic force she'd always been. Every move she made pulled a common thread, amplifying the voices of those the old guard tried to keep quiet. The fans weren't just watching a player anymore, they were following a movement they believed in with their whole hearts. That connection transcended simple fame. By 2027, the All-Star Game in Chicago blew every previous record out of the water. Stadium seats stayed full and ratings hit the ceiling as A-list stars and tech giants rubbed elbows at courtside. The cultural explosion the league had prayed for finally landed. Caitlin Clark led the charge for one squad. Paige Bueckers took the helm of the other. The media tried desperately to manufacture a grudge that just wasn't there. Both icons shut down the drama instantly. During a joint sit-down, a journalist asked how it felt to finally clash on such a stage. Bueckers stepped up to the mic first, pointing out they'd been battling for years, and the only real change was the rest of the world finally waking up. Clark jumped in, noting that the tired trope of stars needing to hate each other to sell tickets was ancient history. She argued they were proof that different paths and personalities could thrive together and lift the entire sport up. The reporter kept digging for a spark of friction, but Clark shut the door. She wasn't feeding the hungry headline machine. They were comrades, they were rivals, they were both legendary in their own right. And they were done fighting for crumbs while the people in charge lacked the vision to bake a bigger pie. That video went viral everywhere, not for the spice, but for the sight of two titans refusing to fake a fight. It was a silent revolution. The actual game was electric, high-speed, cutthroat, and pure entertainment. Clark walked away with the MVP trophy after dropping 42 points in a friendly match that felt like a championship final. Taking the stage, she used her moment to hail Bueckers' skill, Aja Wilson's command, and the collective grit of the league. There was no posturing or power plays, just a genuine respect for the game and her peers. Post-game, Clark made a move. She pulled Sue Bird aside for a private chat. No microphones, no prying eyes, just two generations meeting in the quiet. What passed between them stayed between them. Neither side ever whispered a word to the press. Inner circles only shared one detail. Whatever words were exchanged didn't rewrite the history books, but it gave them both permission to finally put the ghost to rest. A noticeable shift followed that secret sit-down. They didn't become best friends, but a profound sense of mutual recognition settled in its place. An admission that they were products of two different worlds, facing unique pressures and chasing different dreams. Neither was the hero or the villain. The war between them had been genuine, but it was finally over. Carrying the weight of it was a waste of energy. A month later, Bird dropped her life story in a new book. It was a mix of vulnerability and careful walls. The section regarding Caitlin Clark hit like a freight train. It was shockingly blunt. I watched her shatter every ceiling I'd been taught was unbreakable, Bird confessed. She was winning by tossing out the playbook I'd spent 20 years perfecting. Rather than cheering for that progress, I fought against it. That bitterness was on me, not her. She went on to say that Clark didn't owe her any respect or subservience. Her only debt was to the game itself, and she paid it in full, even when the very people who should have helped her were trying to hold her back. It wasn't a standard public apology. It was a raw, unfiltered moment of clarity. Inquired regarding the text, Clark offered a concise reply. The candor is refreshing, she noted. Everyone simply pursues the logic that resonates in that specific window. Zero resentment lingers within me. I am merely relieved that the actual narrative has finally reached the public record. Now, the following athlete hitting that wall realizes they aren't losing their mind. It is a reality they can endure, with brighter horizons ahead. That concluded it. No digging up old wounds or reliving the pain, just a clean break from the past. Such poise spoke far louder than any theatrical outburst could. It demonstrated how significantly Clark had moved beyond that ancient friction. Whether Bird offered praise or criticism, her perspective no longer held any power over the superstar's cosmic trajectory. 7 years deep, Clark had conquered every peak available on the hardwood: titles, MVPs, unbreakable records, Olympic gold, and a fame that transcended the entire sport. Yet her crowning glory wasn't silver or gold. It was rewriting the financial equations. New pros now walked in with agents hunting profit shares. They established their own commercial identities before they ever stepped onto a professional court for their debut. They wielded a level of power their predecessors couldn't fathom, and they all recognized the architect who constructed that reality. Not through ego or a thirst for wealth, but by flatly denying the idea that historical tradition was their ultimate fate. Clark demonstrated how a single soul could fundamentally overhaul an entire industrial ecosystem, not by pleading for space or waiting in line, but by being so relentless and raw that the machine had to pivot. That is legacy. Forget the buckets and wins, those are great, but focus on the unlocked doors and shattered ceilings for kids she will never even meet. Decades later, when a different rookie met the status quo's wall or was told to quiet down and fit the mold, a map already existed. The road wasn't smooth, but there was ironclad proof it was passable, because Clark had already cleared the trail. 10 years after Caitlyn's debut, the league felt brand new, not just in marketing fluff, but in its very soul and underlying structure. Crowd sizes had tripled. Media deals mirrored the men's side per contest. Players were legends. Little girls didn't just mention playing hoops. They dreamed of being the next Caitlyn or Paige, or any star blooming in the garden she helped plant. The deepest transformation wasn't a stat line, it was the mindset. Athletes no longer walked in apologizing for their fire. They stopped shrinking just to make others feel comfortable. They arrived owning their worth and pushing it even higher. At 33, she was still a titan, though she whispered this run would likely be the finale. Not due to a breaking body or fading magic, but because her work on the floor was finished, other empires needed building. Her charity reached 40 states. Global alliances were thriving. A massive scholarship fund had already paved the college path for hundreds who were once left behind. Still, her most daring move had been simmering in the background for years. A fresh basketball frontier, not to fight the WNBA, but to grow the soil. A home for internationals seeking a different American dream. A stage for those healing from setbacks or those the scouts missed. They called it the Open League. The news broke during the postseason, timed carefully to keep the spotlight on the active games. Feedback was a whirlwind. Suit and tie leaders were nervous. The players were absolutely electric. New options meant more power, more stages, and long-term security. Sue Bird was cornered for her take at a media event. Her answer stunned the room. Caitlyn has always been about pushing the limits of what is possible. She remarked, "Why quit now? This fits her perfectly, and frankly, the WNBA will find itself growing stronger because of it. Competition forces everyone to level up." It was a sharp, validating nod that felt like a passing of the torch. The Open League ran in the winter months. Pro deals let stars compete in both arenas. The play was lightning fast and inventive while keeping the spirit of the game pure. Born for the digital age, it prioritized the stream. Clark sat out the debut year to close her WNBA chapter, but her DNA was etched into every rule, every value, and the radical freedom of the design. That was her ultimate mic drop. Not just tweaking the game, but redefining who plays, how they play, and who owns the keys. Her dream, finally breathing. Pure hoops, unchained from ancient gatekeepers and those phantom ceilings that shadowed her once her talent became too huge to be boxed in. The dream held true. June of 2035 witnessed the final buzzer of Caitlyn Clark's professional journey. Closing with a title, just like the script demanded 41 points and 8 daggers from beyond the arc. An outing that distilled her whole essence into a single game. Fearless, surgical, and completely unstoppable. When that last whistle blew, the energy shifted past mere cheering. The stands erupted in a profound wave of collective realization. Nobody there thought they were just watching a game end. They knew they were experiencing the sunset of a legendary epoch. Standing alone at the logo, she let the gravity sink in, weeping not from sorrow but from the sheer weight of it all. From the burdens she carried, the walls she demolished, and the massive world she had spent years constructing from nothing. Gold trophies and flashing bulbs followed, yet the enduring memory was Clark grabbing the mic one last time for a final word. She looked back on her debut a decade prior, a green kid who just wanted to lace up and play ball. She confessed that rattling the establishment or overthrowing icons was never actually part of her original itinerary. Excellence was her only goal. Yet along the path, she stumbled upon a truth that changed her entire perspective. Thriving in a world that wasn't built for you, climbing through friction rather than following a paved path forces a hard decision. You can choose to shrink yourself down to fit the narrow space society provides, or you can shatter the walls to expand that space, though she admitted that growth costs you peace and fractures your relationships. She occasionally doubted if the sacrifice was worth it, wondering if following their script was smarter than burning it to the ground. Then she turned her gaze toward the new crop of talent currently walking into the league. The rookies who don't have to fight those same old wars, who enter already owning their brand and rewriting rules without asking anyone. Seeing their freedom finally answered every lingering doubt she had. Every grueling moment was justified. Every single headline-grabbing controversy, all those labels of being too loud or arrogant were worth it because the war was for the future, not her ego. The standing ovation roared for minutes before Clark gave the rising stars one last piece of advice from the stage. To the outcasts and the innovators who see the game differently and dare to dream outside the lines, she told them straight, "You don't need a blessing to be legendary, you just need to be undeniably great." She dropped the microphone and walked into the tunnel. By the next morning, the internet was a sea of tributes. Icons and casual fans who never touched a basketball until she forced them to watch shared their stories of her impact. It was about her symbolism, not just her stats, but the real shocker came when Sue Bird posted a personal clip. No fancy editing or lighting, just her in a living room, speaking with raw honesty directly into the smartphone camera. She finally admitted that Clark's vision for where the sport needed to go had been right all along. Bird confessed her previous coldness was wrong, born from an instinct to protect a safe version of the game that limited everyone. She spoke of her own era's struggle, the years spent begging for a crumb of respect for women's sports. But when a newcomer arrived and reached those heights in a heartbeat, captivating audiences that Bird never could. While evolving the playstyle beyond her own understanding, she felt a flicker of fear. That insecurity became a barrier, yet she now realized Clark didn't just play ball, she broke the glass. She exposed the gatekeepers who were more worried about their status than actually letting the sport reach its full potential. She praised Clark for showing the world what real grit and a truly honest legacy actually look like. She offered an apology for the quiet sabotage and for making an already difficult climb even harder than it should have been. She admitted that Clark never needed her seal of approval to conquer the world, the most humbling lesson of the decade. Progress never waits for the old guard. The video exploded online because such unscripted, raw accountability is almost never seen. Clark didn't issue a formal reply. 72 hours later, she simply uploaded a single grainy photograph from her very first professional training camp. It showed her and Bird on a bench, both looking away from the camera, eyes locked on the court action, captioned with total simplicity. "This game is larger than all of us." No further explanation was required. Decades later, when historians study how the sport truly transformed, they all point to the exact same moment in time. It wasn't about a record or a contract. It was the day Caitlin Clark simply refused to be made small. Her choice flipped the script entirely, impacting the whole association and every rookie coming up next. The old guard realized raw talent can't be bottled. Major organizations saw the writing on the wall: adapt or vanish. Broadcasters witnessed fans craving realness over scripted hype. Meanwhile, a whole wave of stars mastered the ultimate takeaway. Being legendary doesn't need a green light, it needs guts. Caitlin Clark possessed that fire. Hoops underwent a permanent shift. This wasn't about a ball and a hoop, it was about shifting the hierarchy. Picture pure skill crashing into a machine designed to gatekeep rather than honor excellence. She didn't climb by crushing rivals. Her victory didn't come from noise or ego. She simply stayed so elite that trying to stop her felt foolish. Each move to dim her light only proved why the world needed her brightness. Pushing her to the edges only highlighted her central force. Ultimately, the industry changed out of desperation, not desire. Survival was the only option left. Supporters picked genuine grit over optics, while brands bet on cold stats over status. Athletes grabbed the mic instead of staying quiet. The front office had to keep up or die out. That's the core truth. Shaking the foundations doesn't require anger. It requires outscaling the problem. You simply make the old ways irrelevant. True transformation happens when your skill becomes undeniable. Her legacy reaches way beyond points or trophy cases. She handed out bargaining chips. She granted a freedom that upcoming pros won't ever have to beg for again. She redefined the ceiling for the women's game when top-tier play isn't restricted by outdated norms or safety. You won't find this narrative in a PR blast. It's not tucked inside some flashy reel or a corporate script. The real juice hides in those tiny moments that the higher-ups hope you ignore. We're talking leverage swaps, cash flows, and those low-key moves that rebuild associations before the public catches on. That's why this saga is crucial. It's exactly why these deep dives keep coming to light. For the rawest analysis, the backstage heat, and the grit that gets edited out of TV, Courtside Leaks is your hub. Forget the shallow gossip. We're looking at the engines driving the chaos. Remember, the real play happens off the hardwood. Fact usually beats the institution to the finish line. We're tracking every perspective, every secret drop, and every curtain pull that they try to hide from you. Smash that like button, sub up, leave a word, and pass this along. Keep your eyes on Courtside Leaks, the spot for what's really going down in the WNBA news cycle.